Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode, the first episode of the new year of 2023 here on the Coach Replay Show. I'm your host for the day, Corey Camp. And I'm excited to have one of our followers. He's not just a follower of the Coach Replay Show, and I know that because he's commented on some previous shows. We've had a chance to comment back and forth over social media about some of his interesting ideas and takeaways from our Coach Replay Show. But he's also a user of the Sibme platform who sponsors this show. And he's had a chance to work with our team and some of our colleagues, but this is my first time meeting him. So welcome for the first time on the show, Andrew Bourassa. So do us a favor, Andrew, and tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you coming in from and what do you do?
Sure. Hi, Corey. Thank you for having me. I'm actually coming in from Maine, a very rural state where we are using the platform to help connect with our staff as we coach. And I've been a coach for about 7 years in various age groups. I started with pre-K and pre-K staff and been working with infant toddler staff and up to pre-K for the last 2 to 3 years specifically. We work right now, I work with high quality childcares across the state to provide coaching and work with our staff so that they can provide direct coaching with them. But I've been in education for about 20 years in the field of special ed and public ed. And I now work for a Head Start program at KVCAP here in Maine. I have quite an extensive experience in different roles in education. I've been in ed tech all the way up through a supervisor and a coach. And so, I feel that brings great value to just the experience overall in working with staff.
Yeah, I think it does. I have a similar background, so that's pretty cool. Formerly special education, have had many different roles at different levels, both at the campus, in a rural campus, but as well as at the statewide level, at the regional level. Now I get to work with the Sibme team all over the world, which has been pretty exciting, especially in the last few months. We've expanded out into some pretty cool new countries around the world. So that makes me definitely understand why you and I have kind of clicked before on some of the comments and some of the things that you've shared, because we've got similar backgrounds. So I love that. Well, I'm excited to have you on and get to meet you, of course, today and get to do that here on the Coach Replay Show. But I'm also excited to have you kick off this month's theme, which is all about equity. How do we bring equity into our coaching? How do we support equity in the classrooms, different strategies? And I really love where you're going to take us today on the show, which is to kind of the importance of us understanding ourselves, knowing ourselves, so that way we can put our best foot forward and best support those who we are there for. So talk to me a little bit about what equity means to you in your coaching work and where you're proposing we start this work.
Sure. So I guess for me, it kind of connects back to what we were talking about in experience and history and past and knowing ourselves, right? So, but before we go there, I kind of just wanted to say that, part of the reason that, yes, when talking about equity and inclusion, even though my specific topic may not be so focused on that today, I wanted to just kind of connect it a little bit in the sense that, we, in my coaching work and in my staff's coaching work here in Maine, we work in a very large rural setting. So in order to have equitable access for anybody who's doing this work, regardless of, whatever class status they might occupy, those large geographic distances can really be overcome with small resources by using these coaching platforms. And by having coaches that know themselves and are well trained, it really supports them to be able to provide access to a wide range, much like you were saying with Sibme, providing access really to the world now as a platform. Mm-hmm. So, we've seen similar kinds of things here. And I feel like in a rural state like Maine, where geographical distance alone can create disparities in what people are able to receive in their coaching, their access. Mm-hmm. This asynchronous format as well allows them to access things at their time that fits them. So in different communities, in different cultures, in different settings, It allows us to provide access to one another in a time that best fits them. It truly allows us to be human-centered because it's letting go of that power and control of our schedules, right? So it really brings me back to those thoughts around that DEBI work. And so really that short story is that the remote coaching is more accessible because it removes some of those the distance barriers, but it also potentially removes some communication barriers. I mean, we've even been able to do some translations and things like that with staff that we wouldn't probably have been able to work with as seamlessly in real time as we were able to do through platforms. So I think that, just removing any of those barriers, it really does allow us to just have more general access. And it just allows us to really focus on the readiness of the person that's coaching, and rather than any of those kind of barriers that might be involved.
I love that. And I would like to just kind of connect to that for a moment, because I think that's an important element when we talk about equity. Equity is not just, and we'll have some guests on this month who are going to talk about equity from, a class, or even kind of, thinking about the racial standpoint of equity, but also equitable access, not just based on, who I am and where I come from, but where I live and the tools that I have access to. And you're absolutely right. It's not about using technology for technology's sake, just to say we're innovative or, it's the future, but to solve true problems of inequity when we're thinking about teachers' access to ourselves or access to support that's closer to their first language. I even think, I'm a huge fan of video enhanced coaching, even if I'm able to, if I'm under the same roof as the teacher. I've been a fan of video-based coaching because I've seen it bring more equity into our conversations, in that the teacher, because they've had a chance to see themselves or see a video and rewind and replay that, see that model multiple times, or see that self-reflective video multiple times, they are now better empowered and prepared to have more talk time in our conversation. It's not me going, all right, when I was in your classroom, I saw this, or I noticed this, or do you remember this? I'm spending most of my time helping them remember, but now we can just cut right to what we notice, what we both had the opportunity to notice, and where we want to go from there. And I find my teachers are then talking more. And so there's more equity in who's doing the talking in the conversation as well. So yeah, I love that. I love that point that you bring when we talk about equity. So of course, equity is just, there are so many dimensions to that word. There's so many different lenses we could look at it through. So I think that's an important note. Love that.
And as you were talking, you made me think too. I mean, even our own privilege, right? You make me think about, like, analyzing our own privilege. I have easy access to the internet. I work remotely right now, so my schedule is more flexible than some of the people I coach and work with. In some communities, that's even more restrictive depending on what their situation is. Maybe they have two jobs and their actual time to get online is not till 11 or 12 o'clock at night. So it's really about, for me, it's really been also connecting to being aware of our own and analyzing, going back to what my purpose of my talk today is really thinking about, what is your privileges too? And like, how do those affect the lens that we view things? And so I think all of that connects for me to this topic that you guys are covering this month. And I think for me, another real kernel that I learned in coaching was that equity didn't mean that everyone gets the same thing. And so like, for me in the beginning, as a coach, I was really passionate. I wanted everybody on my staff to have coaching from me. And I learned, that wasn't, it wasn't an appropriate PD tool for some of them. And then in other cases, it hurt the quality of the coaching for those that were ready, because my time and attention was diminished because I was trying to coach too many. So I think some of it's all about just kind of learning those pieces and really being reflective. And we'll get to that as we talk today.
Yeah. I'm hearing kind of just honoring the individual and their needs, meeting them where they are. Definitely technology can do that, but also just, building that relationship. So your first point on this topic, which I love, is know thy own self. So talk to me a little bit about that and why you're presenting that as part of this equitable theme today.
Sure. So I guess like I'm a super visual person. I like my cultural references. People that know me know I've used like the Hulk in Jurassic Park. It's pretty common for me to use these things. So I guess it comes for me today as I was thinking about my talk with you today. I was thinking about kind of two things. So this is going to sound like a weird start, so stick with me. Number one is know thy enemy. So if that phrase is true, and then number two is I am my own greatest enemy or critic, then I defer from that. By better knowing myself, I can better know how to support others. Both by knowing myself and how I relate to others, but also by understanding myself, I better understand others and human beings in general. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, Corey.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I think, and I was telling you this just before we started recording, I'm a fan of this. I feel like in order to pour into others' cups, to use another analogy, I've got to have something here. I have to fill my vessel first and protect my vessel and know what's in there, right? To know if that's the right cup of tea for that person. So I really love this idea of knowing thyself, this idea of being aware yourself, looking inward before you can move outward. It makes a lot of sense to me. So what are some ways that you recommend that folks can begin to know themselves, right? Like we know who we are, we've got certain ideas, but how can we be intentional about just better understanding ourselves with equity in mind?
Sure. So I guess I'll preface this by saying I'm a little bit of a nerd for sociology. So I do love these things. And I would like to say that, I'm very fortunate because I work for an agency that's deeply invested in professional development. And they at KBCAP have invested in considerable time and energy and funding in our staff. And, that kind of investment in professional development really has allowed us to know ourselves better. And that has translated to retention for our coaches. Our coaches really do understand who they are and how best they can support others and when they can't and when they need to call in help. So I think that's kind of the thing. So I kind of broke this down. I think there are some tools that are kind of about, well, first of all, I'll say these are all just tools. So the links that are shared in the reference notes and the things that we'll mention here today are just better ways to know ourselves and know others, as we mentioned, and that each resource is just things for you to hold on to, like tool belt, like we talk about all the time in education. So as we know, coaching is about the people and how we interact with other people. So achieve that shared purpose or that shared goal. So obviously, if knowing people supports that purpose, then knowing yourself is knowing people, right? So those two connect. So the first way I'd like to start is some things are kind of learned or taught to us and modeled for us. So like, for instance, that might be like one of the things I reference is knowing your conflict style. For me, my conflict style is the B, if you use the quiz that I provided a link for in the references. But, the point being there that knowing your own conflict style and how you manage conflict and manage challenging interactions with other individuals informs how we interact with others in our daily life, of course, right? In our interactions, in our relationships, but definitely in the workplace and workplace conflict. And simply just supporting people with different styles, being aware that there are different styles and what those are and how they interact with one another. For instance, as you take that quiz, you might note that, or if you did take the quiz, you might note that you lean strongly in one or two areas, but have very few inclinations towards other areas of conflict management. And then that certainly could inform how you manage conflict with individuals that might lean towards another style than yourself. So that's just one example. Leadership styles is another one. Leadership styles, obviously, those play heavily into workplace dynamics and professional development. Success in a workplace even, right? Ability to lead successfully in a match to an agency's own style, their culture, and the ability of others that we lead to get their needs met and be successful. And we talk about equity and inclusion, like leadership styles are really important to think about because we want to be sure that our style is actually inclusive of all and supportive. And if it isn't, by definition, how do we work to be reflective to support those individuals and create systems that will do so? And then kind of, a couple others that are in there would be like motivational interviewing skills. I talk about this a lot with our staff. They teach us that acknowledging, for instance, is not agreeing. And I think that like knowing motivational skills and having that kind of kernel, that nugget, it's been such a valuable tool for coaching, right? To tell somebody that to acknowledge somebody's perspective is not necessarily agreeing with them, but it's acknowledging that you understand where they're coming from and that their lens might be different than yours. And it allows you to take a step in the direction of working on rapport to move forward in that shared goal. So all of these things, and and all of them, most of them are going to be rooted in that reflective practice. And this comes back to that, when we started at KVCAP, we make sure that we really ground our staff in that reflective practice training, and we use touch points. And I do think it's been really helpful to kind of ground all these other professional tools and learnings, whether that's leadership styles, motivational interviewing, conflict styles, trainings on coaching and mentoring. They're all kind of going to ground it in that crucial building block of reflective practice.
Yeah. And I think, again, going back to the idea of using video and how I found that reflective practice has created more opportunities for my teachers to have more ownership in their learning and where our shared goals are going to be, what they want those to be. I think reflection is like, everything goes back to reflection. That's been the thing I've focused on in the last over a decade in my work in education, because I really do think if we can have time to reflect and support what we reflect on and how we reflect and the frequency, and it really does make a difference. So it makes total sense to me reflecting on this. What I also hear are, some really great tools. I will definitely be seeing what my conflict style is. I have not taken that assessment that you've shared with us. So that'll be what I do right after this call, I think. But then also, these are tools that can be provided to the teachers that we work with. It may be that they need to understand themselves a little bit better. And we see that they maybe need to look inward a bit, or they're coming to us with an issue. Maybe they're having an issue with a colleague or a leader on their campus, and they're asking for input. Being aware of what our conflict style is and how that might influence how we support them through their own conflict, but also the importance of them knowing their conflict style. So I hear some really great resources that can kind of continue a trickle down effect. And, to our last theme last year, at the end of the year, we went right out with empowerment. I think this is empowering as well. You also bring up a great point. Oh, sorry. I want to hit on the point that you bring up and how your organization has been intentional in providing this type of professional learning and experience and support for coaches, I think, and how that has helped, retention of the coaching staff and the quality of your coaches, I think, is also just a really, really important note for anybody who might be a leader of a coaching team or a program to consider.
I agree. And that even comes into effect of, the investment in using Sibme as a platform and, them understanding the value of, you mentioned giving them voice. And, one big shift that I became aware of when we started using Sibme, and I think this is a really powerful one that doesn't get said enough, is when I was video coaching, I was coming in as the coach and videotaping what I saw. And that video was really authored by me. It was my lens of what they were doing. What I love about Sibme is this is their lens of what they're doing. They're sharing what they feel is important to share from their perspective. And that can be as simple as a shift of where the camera is in the room can make a difference on what we see and how we see. And so I do think that what you say is very, very important. And when we think again about equity and inclusion, giving them the voice and the power and shifting that in as many ways and subtle ways as we can, it's huge.
Yeah, even simply as I love the idea of thinking differently about where the camera is located to provide just a different perspective within the room. Because you're absolutely right. If I'm coming in and I'm recording, I'm going to be recording probably from the back of the room where I'm kind of trying to sit out of the way. But a lot of times when I have my teachers recording for me because I'm not able to come out, or there's something that they feel would be a more meaningful observation, and my calendar doesn't allow for it, then I find that they record a lot from maybe the front of the room, which gives us a different perspective on what's happening with our learners in the room, but also is more of the perspective of the teacher who's kind of more in that power zone at the front of the room. So Yeah, I just think that's really interesting as well, is thinking about equity in even just our observations equitable, and how can we bring more equity into that, allowing technology to be able to be a good supplement or support for that process.